Hi everyone, I hope you're doing really well. Our reading today comes from Mark's 7th chapter, verses 24 through 37. Jesus set out and went away to the region of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know he was there, yet he could not escape notice. But a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately heard about him, and she came and bowed down at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile of Syrophoenician origin. She begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. He said to her, "Let the children be fed first, for it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." But she answered him, "Sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." Then he said to her, "For saying that, you may go. The demon has left your daughter." So she went home, found the child lying on the bed, and the demon gone. Then he returned from the region of Tyre and went by way of Sidon towards the Sea of Galilee, in the region of the Decapolis. And they brought to him a deaf man who had an impediment in his speech, and they begged him to lay his hand on him. He took him aside in private, away from the crowd, and put his fingers into his ears, and he spat and touched his tongue. Then, looking up to heaven, he sighed and said to him, "Ephphatha," that is, "be opened." And immediately his ears were opened, his tongue was released, and he spoke plainly. Then Jesus ordered them to tell no one. But the more he ordered them, the more zealously they proclaimed it. They were astounded beyond measure, saying, "He has done everything well. He even makes the deaf to hear and the mute to speak." The Gospel of the Lord. The main idea of Christianity is to love God and to love others. To treat your neighbor as you want to be treated. Jesus knew all about neighbors. This is not abstract stuff for him. He grew up in Nazareth, which is a small town. He was a carpenter until most likely he was around 30 years old. And he knew what it was like to have somebody come on over and say, "Hey, Jesus, could you give me a hand? Can I borrow your hammer? Could you fix my table? Could you do me a favor?" Again and again in Jesus' life, we see him reach out to people, heal people, have compassion and mercy. But what we don't see is Jesus playing favorites. In our gospel reading last week, some really religious people called the Pharisees said to Jesus, "Hey, your disciples aren't following the rules." Jesus, look at them. Everything the disciples are doing, they're eating and drinking, even what they're saying is wrong, wrong, wrong. The Pharisees were the upper crust. They were the elite. And they thought they were God's favorites. But Jesus lets them have it and says, "You think because you keep the rules, that's what makes you pure? You got it all wrong. It's not what you eat or drink or what rules you follow. It's about your heart and your soul, your life." Right after this, Jesus does something unexpected, and he moseys over to the wrong side of the tracks, which is where we pick things up today. We gather that Jesus is trying to get away from the crowds, just for a bit, perhaps for a rest, to be out of the public eye. Another likely reason for his departure from Galilee is that he is becoming too popular. He's becoming a threat to Herod. That could be, and eventually will be, a really big problem for Jesus and his disciples. But at this point in his ministry, it is nearly impossible for Jesus not to be known, as we see in our reading today. a woman. Now keep in mind how women were viewed in that time and place. It wasn't good. A woman approaches him, and here's what we know about her from the accounts in the book of Mark and Matthew. We know she's from an area called Syrian Phoenicia. Thousands of years ago, Jewish people did everything they could to avoid going there. It is an unclean pagan area. A big city with pagan temples and pagan history. It is not highly cultured. It is not well respected. We also read that this woman is a Canaanite and a Gentile, which means she is not considered to be an insider by religious people. She is an outsider on several levels. But as we see here, her gender, her heritage, her neighborhood, and her station in life make very little difference to Jesus. Some theologians call what Jesus does here his most significant miracle ever. This miracle displays a simple truth: that God does not show favoritism. Jesus celebrates every human life. Here, an unclean, impure woman is crying out for mercy and the healing of her little girl. And in her edgy interaction with Jesus, she shows us that grace and mercy and healing have always been for people who are basically, as the text describes, dogs. This woman needed Jesus to heal her daughter. She is desperate in every sense of the word, and Jesus meets her in her brokenness and heals. He meets in brokenness and he heals. Now, if you have a heart that is sometimes dark, sometimes selfish, or if you're a liar, or you rely a little too much on alcohol, or you've betrayed someone, or if you think some really awful things about other people from time to time, or you have some habit that you know you need to break, but you just can't seem to do it, then you've got to remember this. Jesus meets us in our brokenness, and he heals. In Jesus, the scriptures tell us we are a new creation. The old is gone and the new has come. He can make you new. The story continues today with a second healing. This time, a man whose deafness produces a speech impediment. And Jesus meets this man about 20 miles away from where he healed the woman's daughter. This place is in the region of the Decapolis, which is a league of free cities that are known to be characterized by high Greek culture. In other words, this place is highly respected. This place is highly cultured. Now, the lesson of these two miracles shows us that the gospel has power for all people, in all places. There are no insiders, there are no outsiders. Something very deep and wonderful is going on in these healings. An author named Dave Runyon co-wrote a book about the art of neighboring, which is an interesting title. And he said, the inspiration for this is when a group of pastors got together and had a conversation about what can we do. And the church leaders all got together and said, how do we care for our community? How do we make our community a better place? And so they finally met with the mayor of their city. And they asked the mayor, what does the city need most? What is your dream for it? If you could wave a magic wand and you could create what change, what would it be? And here's what the mayor said. Well, it's quite interesting and embarrassingly simple. To tell you the truth, the biggest single factor by far that helps a city flourish is when it has a sufficient number of really good neighbors. The biggest difference maker for a city is actually good neighborhoods. When people do something just as simple as caring for their neighbors, all kinds of wonderful things begin to happen. When neighbors care, the elderly are watched out for. At-risk young people stop being so at risk. Crime goes way down, and volunteering goes up. Odd things happen. Like people begin to take better care of their homes, better care of their yards, and property values go up, and isolated people are less lonely. Most of the problems we have could be eliminated or greatly reduced if our city just had a sufficient number of really good neighbors. So often as human beings, we divide people up. Who's in my little group? Who's not in my little group? That's how we do things. God does not do this. For God, when He looks at the world, there is no them. You've never looked at a human being in your life who was not created by God. And that means you and I are called to embrace all people. I'd like to close with a story from Tom Meany. He writes this. People think we are more divided as a country than we've been in a long time. I know it can seem that way. But when I was a little kid in 1969, the Vietnam War was tearing this country apart. They'd shot John F. Kennedy, and they'd shot Bobby Kennedy, and they'd shot Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, and there was the Manson family and the Zodiac Killer, and it felt like the whole country had just lost its mind. My father, who'd grown up in the Depression, well, his faith in humanity was just at a low ebb. And the two of us that June were driving from Oakland to L.A. in our old 1960 Oldsmobile, and the water pump blew out south of Bakersfield. This was long before cell phones, so we were going to have to hoof it like 9 or 10 miles into town when this young cowboy pulls up with a flatbed and offers to tow us in. And all my dad had on him for money was this old Chevron gas card. So he kept telling this young fella, you know, I can't pay you. And the young cowboy's looking at him like, yeah, I wasn't going to charge you. So he rolls us into town, and this is a Sunday, so nothing's open. So he goes to get his mechanic friend to open up his garage, and my dad says, hey, listen, I don't have any money. And the mechanic says, you know, we'll work something out. And then they all realize that they don't have the actual parts. So now they've got to go and roust out the local auto parts store owner. And they bring him down, and my dad's like, okay, we've got to talk about how this is all going to get settled. Because he couldn't imagine anyone being so trusting about money. So the cowboy says, look, if it'll make you feel better, I got a bunch of watermelons I need to get loaded onto a flatbed, and it's pretty hot work, and if you help me out, I will pay for your part. So the next thing you know, we're all unloading watermelons from inside a rail car that's about 140 degrees. And 90 minutes later, we're all soaked in sweat, and up rolls our car, running like a top. And my dad says, "I really don't know how to thank you fellas for this good turn." And we're turning to go. And the mechanic gets this look on his face, and he says, whoa, where do you think you're going?" And you could see on my father's face all the fear and the distrust come to the surface. He stiffened like a leopard. And the mechanic says, No. My wife's going to make us all Sunday dinner. And you and the boy can get a shower and a clean shirt. It'll make your drive easier. So we sat down for dinner, a fried chicken from the chicken right over there, and corn on the cob from the corn right over there. Man, I got to tell you, I will never have a meal that good ever again. My dad didn't say maybe 3 words that whole drive. And when we got home, I was just about to get into bed and turn off the light. And he stops in the doorway, and my dad says to me, "No matter what you see in the movies, on TV, or you read in the papers, you listen to me. That's how people really are." And about a month later, Neil Armstrong walked on the moon. So keep the faith. May we this week remember our own call, our own responsibility, perhaps our own little circle in life. May we love our neighbors, all of them, well. And may we know that our lives and how we live them, moment by moment, day by day, can change so much for so many. Please pray with me. God, we thank you for the reminder that we are called together and that we are called to be good neighbors to everyone we encounter, no exceptions. God, may you teach us the ways of peace and the ways of love and the ways of hope and the ways of grace. And God, where there is darkness, may your light truly shine. May we be renewed in our hope, knowing that you are with us and love us more than we can ever imagine. We ask it all in Jesus, our risen Savior's name.